It is the largest manufacturing trade show in the entire Western Hemisphere. Not only that, but the longest running trade show of its kind as well. My name is Matt Kirkner. We are here with the Tech Ed Podcast at the International Manufacturing Technology Show, the SmartForce Student Summit to be exact. And as you know by now, live streaming on YouTube all week long from this show and meeting some of the most interesting, fascinating people in the world of technical education, industry, higher education, manufacturing technology, and our next guest absolutely fits the bill. It is so exciting to introduce to the Tech Ed Podcast audience Liz Stuck, the Senior Director of Workforce Development for MXD. Liz, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And it's great to have you in Chicago. I understand that you are an Illinois native, but that you also spent some time in Washington, D.C., right?
That's correct. Yes, originally from Illinois, spent a few years out in Washington, D.C., and now back here in Chicago.
So I just moved my son to Washington, D.C. a month ago, right? And so far, so good. Everything's going great. And you're proof of the fact that you can move to D.C. and then come back to the heartland of America still a normal person, right?
That's right. That's right. You can go out there, come back, bring some new skills back with you. And if it weren't for family here, it might have been a harder sell, but hard to stay away from family for too long.
Isn't that the truth? And so now you're back here in Illinois. You're doing such great things with MXD. I want to start just by talking about the institutes in general. We're big fans of the manufacturing institutes. I didn't know until just a moment ago that you spent time in the Obama administration, and the institutes were really a product of the Barack Obama administration, correct?
That's correct. They were. In fact, the U.S. Manufacturing Council is where that idea started, and that's where it kind of grew from to the state it is in currently, which is 16 institutes around the country.
Isn't that crazy? And so you were there kind of at the ground level, kind of the ground floor? Is that
very
fair to say?
Exciting. Yes,
yeah.
Very exciting.
What was your role when you were out in D.C.?
When I was out in Washington, D.C., I was running the U.S. Manufacturing Council out of the Department of Commerce, where we were bringing manufacturers from around the country together to help with policy recommendations that would then go to the Secretary of Commerce and up to the President to help inform the policies that we currently see for manufacturers.
And I'm always fascinated by people's career pathways. How do you find your way into a role like that?
You start by door knocking in a presidential campaign in New Hampshire in January.
Wow,
and
there
then
you go.
You just keep going from there, state to state. And then when we were successful, onto the White House.
So you went to school in Indiana, you mentioned to me, right? And then
That's
you're
right.
out in DC. So you're actually part of the campaign and
Oh yes, I was part of the
way.
Senate office, part of the campaign, then part of the White House team. It was a really fun ride.
Sounds like a really fun ride. Sounds like we could almost have an entire pathway, or an entire podcast rather, just about that pathway. Of course, time being the limiting factor here. I want to get into your work at MXD. It is one of the manufacturing institutes. Tell us about MXD.
Yeah, so MXD is one of the manufacturing institutes. In fact, it's one of the first manufacturing USA institutes, originated in February of 2014. And we are focused initially on digital for manufacturing, but as time went on, it became evident that we also needed to start taking consideration of cybersecurity for manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And so in 2019, the Department of Defense designated us as the U.S. And the National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing. So now we cover both of those areas. We cover digital for manufacturing and cybersecurity for manufacturing at the Institute.
And in as much as we're always talking about convergences here on the Tech Ed Podcast, it seems like that whole convergence of cybersecurity and manufacturing technology and digital probably more acute than a lot of people recognize. And as somebody that ran manufacturing companies for the better part of a quarter century, I was running manufacturing primarily in the days of having fairly what we call air gap manufacturing operations, right? So I've got a plant, I've got manufacturing technology in that plant, and every single one of those companies, our kind of secret sauce, our IP, was the process by which we manufactured the product. And we kind of held that really close to the vest. We didn't want anybody to know how we were able to produce the level of quality, the level of throughput that we were able to produce. We really kind of kept that private. And it was easy to do, right? I've got 4 walls around my building, I've got a ceiling, and everything's in there. Now we're in this world of Industry 4.0, of advanced manufacturing technology, where everything seems to be connected. And every supplier wants some kind of a route into our manufacturing operation. We have people that maybe even unknowingly are accidentally connecting something to the internet. God only knows what access to information a bad actor might have. Is that what's driving a lot of this convergence between digital, cybersecurity, and manufacturing?
Absolutely. So, as you said, we were moving from these closed in-house systems to these open, connected systems, which is increasing the efficiency of our manufacturers, increasing the competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing, which is fantastic. But the problem is it also opens us up to increased risk from cybersecurity attacks. And in fact, manufacturing is the most targeted sector for cyber espionage attacks, far more than finance, healthcare, any of them. In part because of the IP,
Sure.
and in part because of the vulnerability of the supply chain. So when you take those two factors in consideration, it really is critical that we're thinking about cybersecurity protections as we think about more connected manufacturing.
Extremely critical. As you and I were talking as we were preparing for the show, I'm delivering the keynote address at the Top Shops Expo for Modern Machine Shop tomorrow afternoon. One of the things that we're going to talk about, and people don't realize this, when we think about artificial intelligence and machine learning, the two markets in the United States and around the globe that are most quickly adapting and evolving around AI are finance and manufacturing. So it really speaks to how critical this understanding of the digital thread and understanding how we keep that information secure is in the great work that MXD is doing. By the way, for someone from Washington, D.C., you speak extremely fluently, not from, but who spent 8 years in Washington, D.C., extremely fluently about manufacturing technology. So thank you. Obviously, you've done a tremendous amount of work in and around manufacturing, in and around cybersecurity. And I understand that part of that work is this recently published report, The Hiring Guide, Cybersecurity and Manufacturing. You did this, by the way, in combination with the Manpower Group, which, by the way, is a great Milwaukee, Wisconsin employer.
That's right.
Jeff Joris, I actually paddleboarded by his house on a lake, I won't say which one, in southeast Wisconsin, about 2 weeks ago. Manpower Group doing great work. And you did this to create job titles and job descriptions around manufacturing and cybersecurity. So what are some of the big takeaways from these projects, and what's the job outlook for cybersecurity-focused roles in manufacturing?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways from this work is that the opportunity is perhaps a bit overwhelming. So we used this cybersecurity hiring guide as we combined it with our work on a digital manufacturing hiring guide that we did with the Manpower Group. And the two works combined identify 412 roles that we believe are the future of manufacturing work. And so we're looking at what does this mean in terms of how industry should be thinking about the skills that they need to have in place, how academia should be thinking about the training and curriculum that's being developed, and how we can be bringing parties together to start doing this kind of development, getting these skills into the workplace.
And how does somebody access this report? It sounds really fascinating, to be honest.
So it's on our website, mxdusa.org. It's free to download. Go under the Workforce tab. You'll see both of them listed there. And you'll find not just these 412 roles. You'll find career pathways. You'll find personas and profiles. You'll see technology adjacency areas that we've identified as critical for future development and work. So it's a really useful tool, not just for industry and employers, but for academic organizations and individuals, too.
I'll be looking that up, and anybody who wants to can check out the show notes. We'll make sure and link that up as well in the show notes to this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. I need to correct myself as I'm thinking about it. Jeff Joris is the former CEO of Manpower, still a great Milwaukee employer, and in an organization that, as I've met with many of their leaders over the course of the last several years, really understands this whole Industry 4.0 advanced manufacturing evolution. And here we are at the International Manufacturing Technology Show, looking at it just amazes me how quickly this technology is evolving. The last time I was part of this, I spoke at IMTS 2020, which was virtual. I was here in 2018. I was here in 2016. And it's not just the manufacturing technology that evolves, but it's like the rate of that evolution is kind of getting faster and faster in every one of those 2-year iterations. And even thinking about where we were in 2020, now here we are in 2022. I'm looking forward a little later in the podcast, Liz, asking you about what are some of the exciting technologies you've seen. But before we get into this, I want to stay on this topic of cybersecurity, Industry 4.0. We're seeing what we call the ITOT Convergence. And if people aren't familiar, it's this whole idea that the operations technology world, the information technology world, which used to be very siloed, used to be very, very different career pathways. And when I was running my manufacturing companies, we had a group of people we called information technology. We had a group of people we called operations technology, and those people wanted nothing to do with each other. I mean, like nothing to do with each other. And now we're seeing those two worlds converge. We did a webinar actually about a year ago with the head of IT for Kohler, if you're familiar with Kohler Company,
Absolutely.
Another great Wisconsin employer. And he's got a whole training program for all of his IT people around OT. So in other words, they were
very smart.
Yeah, they're getting invited out to the shop floor. They're looking at a PLC. They're asking to connect a robot to an IoT platform, what have you. And they're like, oh, I don't know what this stuff does. And so he actually took, you're right, very smart, a very forward-thinking way of figuring out how are we going to take our IT professionals and at least give them some understanding of OT. We're seeing the same thing in academia, right? I mean, you said in the answer to the last question, talked about helping educators think about how they evolve their program. So as we see this evolution and this convergence of IT and OT, these people are going to have to play together whether they want to or not, and in many cases, those career pathways are going to start overlapping and combining. What advice do you have for an educator as they look at how do we prepare our programs for that convergence?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things we're looking at. So we, as part of the hiring guide, we started looking at what are the IT/OT roles that we need to be thinking about and the skill sets that manufacturers need to be thinking about. So an IT/OT integration engineer. What does that role look like? What kinds of responsibilities and skill sets do those individuals need to have? And then how do we bring that back to sort of an entry point? So if we look at a cyber systems operator, that's really an entry point into this IT/OT integration engineer.
Sure.
And as we think about that role, we look at it and say, we believe, along with the work we did with Manpower, that this is one of those roles that fits in this 21% of the cybersecurity roles that we're going to see in the U.S. are not going to require a bachelor's degree.
Interesting.
And we believe this is one of those where the technical skills required can be earned through certifications. And so we've already done some work on our end in partnership with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, to develop what we call our CIMOT course. It's Cybersecurity Operations Manufacturing Technology course. And it is designed to build towards a certification for the cybersecurity systems operator role, which is, as I said, that entry point into thinking about IT/OT for the manufacturing worker. It is important then that academics not just think about, okay, what kind of skill sets do we need to prepare individuals with, but how do we offer this in a more flexible way? We cannot take workers out of the workforce right now. Manufacturers can't afford that.
Right.
And we can't take 4 years to train everybody for every role. So how do we offer certifications and credentials that stack, that are flexible, that are offered in a flexible fashion so that workers can continue to learn while on the job and they can learn quickly, implement, and then step out again and do some more work through different certifications and technical skill development offerings. With the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, we have developed this course, and it will actually be available on our virtual training center platform. So we are trying to make sure that we offer as much flexibility as possible for current workers and future workers to access these trainings so that they can develop these skills and bring them into the workplace. So I think academia is working with MXD and working with employers to say what kind of skill sets are needed, how can we offer the most flexible training available so that we can get people skilled quickly.
It's one of the biggest things that, and for our educators that are listening, especially technical colleges, community colleges, workforce development, it's one of the biggest things we're hearing from industrial employers is that in many cases, perhaps because they could get away with it, the traditional way of upskilling incumbent workers has been very rigid. In other words, and I'm not picking on any institutions in particular, but what we hear in general is, I want to train my industrial maintenance technician on programmable logic controller technology. And the community college comes to me and says, okay, we can be here every Friday from 11 in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you can have all your maintenance techs come in and take this course. And they do it the first week, and everybody's at the table. And the next week, somebody's on vacation. And 2 weeks later, there's a line down. And pretty soon, you started with this cohort of 8 people, and you're like finishing with 1 because that model wasn't flexible enough. And it wasn't flexible enough in a couple ways, and I think you touched on both of those key ways. The first one is the whole idea of smaller bites of learning, right?
That's right.
And that's the way anymore people are going to be consuming education. When we're at functional full employment and employers need every single body they can have working on problems, working on production, helping innovate the organization, pulling somebody off and out of the organization to be educated in a rigid fashion, really, really inefficient. Manufacturing is all about efficiency. So how do we, number one, figure out what exactly do we want that person doing, and how do we create a smaller piece of education for them? And then number two, how do we deliver that learning in a really, really flexible way? Go a little deeper on the second part of that. So you mentioned that you've got this platform for this new certification, CIMOT, did you say?
CIMOT, cybersecurity and manufacturing operating technology.
Awesome. I'll get that right maybe by the end of the podcast, but at least I got the SIMOD part of it right. So how is that learning delivered? Is it an e-learning platform? How does somebody experience that?
So again, in keeping flexibility in mind, we're offering it in two ways right now. One is through a virtual cohort, but it's a synchronous cohort. They meet and through virtual courses, same time each week, that sort of thing, kind of what you described, but without having to do it in person and after work hours. But we're also going to be offering an asynchronous version on the Virtual Training Center platform where individuals can go in as they have time and complete the courses. And there is an opportunity to interact with the instructor and the faculty at the academic institution. The Virtual Training Center platform hosts SIMOT, but it hosts other courses as well. We have a number of academic partners who are hosting their content on there. There's content that's been co-developed by MXD that will be on there. All of it generally in line, going back to those hiring guides and the identified roles that we believe are going to be most in demand in the future.
And the college, did you say the College of Baltimore County? Did I get that right? What's the?
It's the University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
Okay, got it. University of Maryland, Baltimore County. So I've got to believe, given that you've got these certifications that are part of that, is that going to drive back into maybe secondary, other post-secondary routes, so that you mentioned Stackable. I mean, that's what Stackability is all about, right?
Absolutely. Again, it's stackability and flexibility, right? So we want to make sure we know that with any one of these first steps an individual might take into training and skill development, there's a number of different pathways that they continue to go from there. And we want to offer those as many opportunities, as many options as possible so that they can meet both their own professional development desires and needs, but also those of their employer. So we are looking at a number of different ways to offer a different set of career pathways depending on what the needs are for each individual worker and their manufacturing employer.
Today's guest is Liz Stuck, the Senior Director of Workforce Development for MXD. We are here at the International Manufacturing Technology Show. As, of course, the Tech Ed podcast, I want to turn our discussion now a little bit, Liz, toward MXD Learn. Tell us a little bit about your work, the work your organization is doing through that effort.
Absolutely. So MXD Learn is the workforce arm of MXD, the Institute, and we are focused on the development of our educational programming. So we are working on programming from the middle school level up through the adult learner. And we look at sort of three key things with every program we run. We look at making sure that industry is leading these initiatives. We really want to know that anything that we're doing, any program we're developing, is validated by industry. Yes, I will hire these workers if they can help them get this skill set. Yes, I will invest in this training and programming. Then we want it to be driven by the community. We really want a community engagement aspect to all the work we're doing, which means we're looking at high school programs that offer dual credit opportunities in community colleges, that offer apprenticeships with small and mid-sized manufacturers in the community. How are we creating those community efforts to ensure, again, that individuals who start in this end up in a job, and that we're supporting manufacturers. And then the third piece is that we are striving to serve those who are typically underengaged in these education opportunities. So we are looking to reach into populations, reach into regions where this training and this opportunity does not exist.
So it's a combination of making sure that it's industry-driven, making sure that it's community-driven, and making sure that those efforts are focused on those populations that, number one, need it most, and probably number two, can most benefit from amazing careers in advanced manufacturing. On that first topic of industry engagement, I know one of the things we hear often from some, not all, some community colleges, some technical colleges, some universities, is it's really hard in this day and age to get our industrial employers engaged in giving us advice, serving on our advisory boards, helping us understand the competencies that are important. What's the trick, or what are some strategies that have worked well?
You know, it's funny. Over the last several years, we've really seen a shift in the mentality and the approach to this. Whereas initially the conversations I might have had with manufacturers were, yes, this is important, please go do this, but we can't support. We've shifted from that to our industry partners looking to work with us longer term and say, yes, we are investing in this. We have a whole team dedicated to this now. How can we work together to identify what these skill sets look like? So we are finding more and more that it's actually the industry partners who are coming to us saying, we need to think about this together. We need to collaborate. How can we do that?
It's so fantastic that tide is starting to turn. This goes back probably 7 years ago. I wrote an article for Gardner Business Media, and I was a manufacturing employer, so I could get away. I got carte blanche to say anything about manufacturers, right? Because I was one, and I said, The title of it was "The Skills Gap Is Your Fault," and then we went through all the list of things that manufacturers had done to kind of create their own skills gap. Not that it was entirely their fault, but a lot of the finger pointing that they were doing at others. It's like, hey, wait a minute, if you're laying people off for convenience, if you're not creating the kind of environment where people want to work, if you don't have an advanced manufacturing look to your manufacturing plant, if you're not engaging with your technical college, your community college, your high school technical education program, that is the reason that you can't find people. And I've seen the same thing over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years. Manufacturers are starting to understand their role in fixing the skills gap and being a part of the great initiative, similar to what you're seeing, it sounds like.
That's right. Absolutely. I think we're really seeing a shift in the mindset. We've gone from sort of this thinking from an abundance mindset to more of a scarcity mindset. And as a result, I think manufacturers are looking around saying, what can we do to better engage with the communities we're in to find workers? In many cases, many times when you talk to individuals within a community, they don't even know that manufacturing is taking place in that community. They don't know that there's a need for workers. They don't know about the good opportunities that exist with very limited training in some cases.
Right.
And so it's sometimes I wouldn't say simple, but it starts with just connecting the dots and opening the doors and really starting the dialogue between individuals within a community and the manufacturing facilities that exist there.
So let's take another step on that, the connecting the dots with the individuals in the community. And you mentioned that kind of one of those 3 pillars is connecting with underserved populations, connecting with individuals who can most benefit from these opportunities. When you reach out to them, when you're connecting with individuals in those communities, number one, what is the message about opportunities in manufacturing? And number 2, what kind of reaction are you getting?
So I think the first part, again, is anytime you're reaching out within a community, there's a couple things you want to consider. And I go back to sort of community organizing days here, which is where you really want to engage those in the community who know the community best. Mm-hmm. Right? We are there to serve as a resource, but we really want to work with those who are already there doing great work. Maybe that's in academic institutions, maybe that's in industry, maybe that's within a church in some cases, mm-hmm. right? There's a whole number of different leaders within a community, and we want to be working side by side with them to kind of drive this effort together. So I think we need to make sure, again, that we are bringing industry to the table right at the start. Mm-hmm. How are they engaging in those conversations and providing sort of an awareness in the opportunities that exist right now within that community? And, it's funny, by and large, I think we expected more pushback or more resistance.
From the community members themselves? From
the community members and the potential future workers, young people.
Yeah.
Did not expect the level of excitement that we have seen for these manufacturing careers. We talk a lot about manufacturing being sort of dark and dirty, and that is not what we're hearing from young people. We're hearing a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest, particularly as we talk about these advanced manufacturing technologies on the horizon.
Well, and what that tells us is that efforts like the Smart Force Student Summit, efforts like the work that you're doing at MXD, like efforts that so many folks are doing to show really manufacturing has evolved, and not every manufacturer is evolved into an Industry 4.0 world or into a clean shop kind of environment, but the innovative ones and the ones that understand what it is going to take to compete for skilled talent in the future have done that, and we're starting to turn the tide with perceptions of students, of parents, of communities about just incredible opportunities that exist here in the world of manufacturing, opportunities that we're seeing all over the International Manufacturing Technology Show, right? And I know MXD has a booth here. You've got a bunch of efforts that you're featuring in your booth. Tell us if somebody's wandering around the show or even walking through the show with a purpose and they walk into your booth, what are they going to see?
Yes, so we have 2 booths here, one at the Student Summit and one at the Manufacturing USA booth. And in at both booths, if you come by, you can check out our cybersecurity box, which is a traveling cybersecurity demonstration, hands-on demonstration that those at the booth can try out. It's a great opportunity to learn about what it looks like to protect the factory and the equipment on the factory floor and the ways in which we're supporting that through the work at MXD.
Cool. And for as long as we are here in Chicago, you have a pretty strong presence, a physical presence in this area, right?
We do. We are located on Goose Island here in Chicago, and so we have a nearly 100,000 square foot facility there on Goose Island where we've got offices, but also a 22,000 square foot factory floor where we are piloting and test bedding different equipment and opportunities, looking at what does it mean to implement digital technologies within manufacturing? What does cybersecurity look like on a factory floor? So a number of demonstrations there for folks to look at when they come by.
Interesting. And so When I hear Goose Island, by the way, I probably should think of MXD first, maybe think of the brewery first. Is that what you
It
hear
is
from
that Goose Island.
Yeah.
That's the one we're talking about. The brewery is not there, but the geese still are, and
Okay.
MXD is there as well. So yes, we're working to make sure that's the first thing you think of when we say Goose Island.
Absolutely, and probably more productive in so many ways going to MXD than necessarily sitting in a brewery all afternoon, although I've been guilty of doing that at one point in time or another in my life. So going to finish up here today, Liz, with one last question. It's a question we ask every single guest here on the Tech Ed podcast, and that is, you've had this fascinating pathway. I mean, you start in Champaign, you end up going to school in Bloomington, Indiana, where I've spent a lot of time cycling, by the way. I used to go down there and train every fall, so love that area. 8 years in Washington, D.C., now back in Chicago with MXD. If you had one piece, given all that experience, one piece of advice for a high school sophomore, what would that piece of advice be?
My piece of advice for anyone, including a high school sophomore, would be to say yes. I find that the more you say yes and take on the opportunity, sometimes you don't know what exactly you're going to jump into, but it almost always leads to a really exciting experience. And I would say that that's how I got to the career pathway I've been on, is by sort of jumping into every opportunity that was in front of me and seeing where it took me next.
That's always been my philosophy as well. In fact, we say it's okay to go into something not knowing exactly how you're going to get out of it, as long as you have the confidence that you'll figure out a way when the time comes. And that philosophy has never failed me, and it hasn't always ended the way that I thought it would started out, but we've always managed to find a way through. It sounds like you're finding exactly the same thing.
That's right. You'll be amazed the places it'll take you.
You will be amazed at the places it'll take you. We're amazed at the places the Tech Ed podcast has taken us this week and all day today here at the International Manufacturing Technology Show, including our fascinating conversation with Liz Stuck of MXD. Liz, thanks so much for being on.
Thanks so much for having me.